Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG show for Thursday, March the 18th, 2021. Hello to Professor Paul and Ron Dan, a random number generator, and Chogokin 666. You know, I could hardly believe it. Last night, the provincial government of British Columbia closed down every place that served alcohol or sold alcohol at 8 p.m. Same thing they did on New Year's Eve. I don't know, does the consumption of alcohol make a COVID-19 more lethal? That would seem to be the implication there. I've described Britain as a country of anarcho-tyranny. Well, Canada is one as well. And I came across this astonishing story from the post-millennial. And I checked about the man involved in this story. I did a news search on both Google and DuckDuckGo, and no Canadian newspaper or television station or mainstream Canadian news outlet has covered this story. Father jailed after referring to biological female child as his daughter. The story is by Aaron Pearce. It begins, there is a man in Canada who can only be alluded to as he who shall not be named, Robert Hoogland. For the sake of natural justice, it is important to speak this man's name. He is now the Canadian state's prisoner of conscience. The warrant was issued by a judge for the arrest of a father after calling his biological female child his daughter and referring to her with the pronouns she and her. Hoogland was found to be in contempt of court. Hoogland is a father to a gender non-conforming biological female 14-year-old who identifies as transgender and prefers the use of male pronouns. Hoogland has repeatedly called this person his daughter, though the court forbade it. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. Vancouver time, Hoogland surrendered himself to the court in response to the Attorney General of British Columbia's warrant for his arrest for contempt. He was arrested and jailed. The warrant was issued by Judge Tamman on March the 4th. Hoogland opposes his child's undergoing gender-affirmative medical procedures and has stated this opposition again and again in the hope of saving his child from irreversible harm. The Canadian medical system, the legal system, and the child's mother press ahead with social and medical transition of the child. On December 14, 2020, Hoogland was compelled by Justice Mazzari's court to collude in the gender transitioning of his 14-year-old daughter and told not to call his biological female child his daughter. In response, Hoogland made a charter challenge engaging his right to freedom of speech. When he appeared in family court, the judge forced him to sit in the prisoner's dock, said Hoogland's lawyer, Carrie Lind, even though he was guilty of no crime. The judge referred to him as the accused. Lind made an application for the judge to recuse himself on the basis that all of this was prejudicial. Hoogland told his story. The child had complex problems, but the court blamed them all on gender dysphoria. His marriage to the child's mother had broken up. He said in grades 5 and 6, his daughter was getting into trouble and hanging out with boys, so they arranged for her to see a school counselor. In grade 7, he noticed she cut off her long hair and started wearing a toupee. He said that she developed intense crushes on 2 male teachers and made a suicide attempt. Hoogland discovered that the school had been showing his daughter Sogi 123, the Going Sexual and Gender Identity Education materials in British Columbia, which amounts to transgender ideology propaganda videos. In the grade 7 yearbook, the child was referred to by a different name. The school counselor changed the child's name without telling her parents. The school socially transitioned the biologically female child on its own initiative with the input of a gender ideologue psychologist, Dr. Wallace Wong. When Hoogland accompanied his child to a consultation with Wong, the psychologist advised the pubescent child to take testosterone. Wong referred the child to the endocrinology unit at the local hospital. Meanwhile, Hoogland was looking for mental health solutions to help the child without drugs. On the child's first visits to the hospital, a treatment plan was put into action. Both the child and her mother, Hoagland's ex-wife, signed a consent form which explicitly stated that the treatment was experimental, meaning that the endocrinologist recommending the treatment didn't know the long-term health impact. A gender identity activist lawyer, Barbara Findlay, I'll just break in to say that I've known of Barbara Findlay, Queen's Counsel. I've known of this woman for decades, and she is an absolute menace. Barbara Findlay represented the child in court. Justice Bowden decided that the child's best interest lay in destroying her long-term health to make her body appear more like that of a male. Hoagland, in contrast, thinks his daughter's best interests lie in preserving his child's health in case his child ends up among the estimated 85% of children who desist in their belief that they are the opposite sex once puberty ends. Hoagland said, "Here I am, sitting there as a parent, watching a perfectly healthy child be destroyed, and there's nothing I can do but sit on the sideline," according to Justice Bowden at the time. "I can only affirm or get thrown in jail." Bowden's court held that the father's consent was irrelevant. The child went a step further, declaring that the child's parents must affirm their child's gender identity and refer to the child as though the fact of her being a gender nonconforming biological female who identifies as transgender means that the child is a boy. If he did not, the parents would be implicated in the criminal offense of family violence. After the hearing, Hoagland gave an interview to the Federalist saying that people cannot change sex and that megadoses of exogenous testosterone would damage his vulnerable biological female child's health. Justice Mazzari then summarily convicted Hoagland of family violence on the basis that he had declined to use his child's preferred masculine pronouns. Mazzari authorized a warrant for Hoagland's arrest in the event that he ever used the correct sex pronouns to refer to his daughter again. Hoagland said in the Mazzari ruling, it said that I can only think thoughts which are contrary to the Bowden ruling. The court was gracious enough that they did not police my thoughts, but everything else they could. In 2019, Hoagland abided by the court order, hoping to get his daughter off testosterone. However, in January 2020, the highest court in British Columbia declared that the child should continue to take testosterone. It also imposed a conduct order on Hoagland that he must continue to refer to his biological female child by male pronouns. Hoagland said, "They've created a delusion and they're forcing parents to live in this delusion. What happens when the bubble explodes and the delusion ends? She can never go back to being a girl in the healthy body she should have had. These kids don't understand. What kind of 13-year-old is about having a family and kids?" Hoagland gave interviews to several Canadian commentators. The broadcasts were suppressed by digital platforms, and he was threatened with contempt of court. What kind of father would I be if, in 10 years' time, she's detransitioning and she asks me, "Why didn't you do anything to stop this? None of you stuck out your neck for me back then." The case continues, as does his child's medical transition. Before surrendering to the court, Hoagland felt compelled to visit his childhood homes and shared some of his thoughts with this writer. Peirce continues, "The Canadian state has taken a drastically wrong turning by institutionalizing transsexual medical procedures for children and then imposing draconian restraints on free expression to conceal the full horror of what it is doing to a generation of children. It seems unwilling to consider the implications of the decision in Kirabel versus Tavistock in the UK. In December, the High Court handed down the decision in Kirabel's judicial review of the state's gender identity clinic, the Tavistock. It held that children of 16 and under were incapable of giving informed consent to puberty blockers. In the judicial review hearing, the court asked the Tavistock why it had no long-term data on the outcomes for the children to whom they gave puberty blockers. It responded that it had a 2011 study, but it was unpublished pending peer review. The Tavistock then published the data the day after the High Court handed down its judgment, and not in a peer review journal. The data confirmed that between 2011 and 2020, a rapidly increasing and disproportionate number of girls were referred to the gender clinic with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. The clinic had known for 9 years that puberty blockers were both ineffective for psychological distress and harmful to physical health. It chose to keep that information from patients, public, and apparently from the court itself. The court heard evidence that the Tavistock Clinic gave children materials which said, as far as we are aware, the blockers will not harm your physical or mental development. The Tavistock study into puberty blockers confirmed that the allegations of Kira Bell and Mrs. A were well-founded. The study showed that of the 44 children given puberty blockers, only one did not progress to wrong-sex hormones. The Tavistock has claimed that the two treatments are not linked, and that taking blockers does not inevitably place children on the medical pathway to wrong-sex hormones and surgery. That claim has been disproven. Blockers are primers for surgery with lifelong health impacts, not simply a benign pause button. They cause long-term damage. Essentially, what they do is freeze a child's development. Child goes on puberty blockers at 12. Physical and mental development of the child stops at that time. The study also found that medical experiments with puberty blockers did not improve the children's mental health. In fact, the children on puberty blockers felt worse on taking them. Preliminary findings which showed that after a year on blockers, there was a significant increase in those answering the statement, "I deliberately tried to hurt or kill myself." The children given blockers also lost critical bone density and height, which they can never recover, leaving them vulnerable to osteoporosis and broken bones. The study was 9 years late, in which time thousands of children were primed for gender affirmation surgeries and lumbered with iatrogenic osteoporosis and stunted growth. It remains to be seen whether the court pursues the matter of the Tavistock suppression of vital data, which could have spared all of those vulnerable children the lifelong effects of puberty blockers. All of this raises the question of why Justin Trudeau and Minister David Lametti continue to push Bill C-16, knowing full well where it leads, destroying the health of vulnerable children for the sake of a delusion. Kira Bell's case is international news and shows anyone who cares to listen what awaits the victims of the trans healthcare industry. Bell described the Tavistock as having a complacent and dangerous culture, which caused her irreversible harm. Its activities have effectively been shut down by the court ruling. Rob Hoogland's child may not have the same experience as Kira Bell, who, now in her early 20s, regrets that she may be unable to become a mother. She hopes that it will no longer be standard practice for gender clinics to withhold from girls that treatment means that they may never be mothers. However, with a 4 in 5 chance of desisting and incontrovertible evidence that gender-affirming medical experiments harm the body and fail to help mental well-being, what reasonable adult could now argue that she should stay on that path? We watch the Hoogland case develop with interest and hope that his arrest and imprisonment may precipitate a watershed moment in drawing national attention to the atrocity of pediatric transitioning. Again, this is a story by Aaron Peirce in the postmillennial.com. I recall a discussion over several issues in the late 1990s in the American religious magazine, First Things. And the question was, how depraved would the United States have to become before people could, in good conscience, withhold allegiance from it? And essentially, Midge Decter, the wife of Norman Podhoretz, shut the conversation down. So where do we stand in Canada now? Well, we have a father jailed because he objects to the sexual mutilation of his adolescent child. Canada has made it legal for physicians to murder patients, including patients who suffer depression or other mental illnesses. Prostitution has been legalized. Canada has become a very wicked country indeed, but what we are told by the press is that people should just stop talking about this social conservatism because, that sort of thing is unimportant. Really, the only important thing in life is money and the GDP. Let's go to the chat. Dan says Bonnie Henry dislikes the color green. Palpicasso88 says Berenson had a hilarious tweet about Justin Trudeau today. Yes, I remember. It was something like, does it bother anyone that Justin Trudeau looks as if he's only wearing a suit because he's got a drunk driving court date? Yes, if Justin Trudeau ever sees this, I'm sure his feelings will be very much hurt. Drag Queen Story Hour, yes, I'll be talking about that. Palpicasso 88, what a shocker. My trail of disgrace, utterly vile. William Hicks says that story is incredible, terrifying. How can all of these adults participate in this atrocity? Well, you know, Canada's poised to pass legislation which would make it a crime, for instance, to send a 12-year-old girl who says that she's a boy to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. No, there must be gender affirmation. How far did we go back on this? 12, 10, 8, 6, 4? Perhaps. Teddy Saginaw says, these people want you broke, dead, your kids raped and brainwashed, and they think it's funny. Yes, the famous quote from Sam Hyde. Tavistock, you say, says Chogokin 666. Okay. Adam says, hypothesis, the uptick in gender dysphoria in children is connected with the redefinition of marriage to include same-sex couples. Marriage was a keystone holding all gender-related concepts in place. Yes. Yes, it was. But of course, marriage doesn't mean anything anymore. Well, certainly not in my country, where if a man and woman live together, presumably a man and woman, after 6 months, the state deems them to be married with all of the benefits and the obligations therein. You know, there used to be this place called Bohemia where people who didn't want to play by the rules would live. But no, it was decided that we can't have that because the social stigma associated with that. And social stigma, we are told by many libertarians, and by no less than John Stuart Mill, that social stigma is as bad or even worse than legal sanctions. Mitch Decter is the mother of John Podhoretz. Yes, Pod Jr. Glib Medley. Yes, indeed. Mitch Decter, is a very intelligent woman, and she was a fine essayist. But neocons started throwing their weight around. Essentially, they took over the conservative movement and said that anyone who doesn't believe what they believe about, say, foreign policy is not really a conservative, which is yet another reason for people not to call themselves conservatives. My Chuck the Buck Norris says, I feel like I'm in a nightmare and can't wake up. Leponius Maximus Murdia says, are you saying Trudeau lounges around in a wife beater and boxer shorts, Kevin? Wife beater refers to a sleeveless t-shirt, their sleeveless undergarment. That's what they call that Belgian beer. I'm struggling to remember the name. That's what they call it in Britain. It's considered a luxury brand here. Stella Artois. Stella Artois is associated with chavs and low people in Britain, and so they call it wife beater. Very amusing. Palpicasso 88 says, Aaron O'Toole will stop the degeneracy. Vote PC, LOL. Yeah, Aaron O'Toole got his son, who appears to be like about 9 years old, to wear a pink T-shirt. Oh, he's against bullying. Very sad. Very sad. I suspect that this child may end up talking about this one day to a therapist. Oh, let's see. Here's some news from Canada. This is from Bloomberg. Derek DeCluett. I used to be Derek DeCluett's boss at BC Report, and he has gone on to much, much better things. Canada housing might be in a historic bubble. A huge bubble after months of runaway price gains, according to economist David Rosenberg, who was bearish on U.S. real estate before it crashed nearly 15 years ago. Homes sold in the Toronto region topped $1 million Canadian, or $792,000 American, on average for the first time last month, with some suburbs and smaller cities recording price increases of 20% or more from January 2020. On Canada's west side, detached homes sold for a median price of $3.3 million in the first 2 months of the year. This might be one of the biggest bubbles of all time, Rosenberg, founder of Rosenberg Research and Associates in Toronto, said in an interview on BNN, Bloomberg Television. Of course, it's been predicated on where mortgage rates are. The price gains don't make sense when the labor market is so damaged from the COVID-19 pandemic, he said. We have a situation where home prices are up 18% year over year with practically no wage growth. Canada did not experience a widespread housing slump similar to the one the U.S. endured in 2007-2008, a slump Rosenberg predicted when he was at Merrill Lynch. Today, Canadian home prices are about 40% higher than in the United States, adjusted for currency, according to the Bank of Montreal. The recent gain caught the attention of policymakers, including the Bank of Canada, which said housing activity has been much stronger than expected. In a rate policy statement Wednesday, it held its key short-term rate at 0.25%. With an employment rate of 9.4% in January, the central bank is right not to worry about inflation, Rosenberg said. We have an unemployment level in this country that's higher than it was at the peak of the last two recessions. So we still have a very deep, I would say, deflationary hole in the labor market. You can have all the commodity strength in the world. If you don't have strength in the labor market, you're not going to get any inflationary impulse. Well, one of the reasons why housing prices are, well, here's some of the reasons. Stephen Harper, when he was prime minister, decided that housing prices could not fall because this would be bad politically for him, because people have bought houses in the expectation not that they're places to live in, but that they will make them rich. Secondly, immigration. Trudeau is bringing over 1.2 million people, permanent newcomers, to Canada over the next 3 years, and they all have to live somewhere. And most of them will end up living in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. Oh, and triad gangsters. The real estate market is estimated to be about 30 to 40% of British Columbia's economy, and the money for condos, especially in Vancouver, is coming from China through triad gangsters. And again, there's this fear that no, we can't let the bubble burst. We have to keep inflating the bubble, because people who thought that, let's say that they bought a house for $1 million and they were going to sell it for $3.3 million, and that gain is tax-free in Canada, they would be very annoyed indeed if the bubble burst and the value of their houses went back to a reasonable level. You know, it's the old story of the man holding on to a rising balloon from Windmill and I, that he doesn't want to let go the rope because he will almost certainly fall to his death, but he just continues to rise higher and higher and higher and higher, with the expectation, that something will turn up. Here's another story on that subject from Canada's National Observer by Max Fawcett. Canada's housing market is on fire and headed for disaster. COVID-19 has produced any number of weird outcomes, from conservatives advocating for a basic income to a failing video game retailer briefly becoming the most talked about company in the world. But maybe the weirdest of all has been the U-turn in Canada's housing market, which recovered from some weakness in early 2020 to post a rally that caught almost everyone off guard and has raised some difficult questions for policymakers across the country. I should mention that one of the things that Stephen Harper did was that he allowed American mortgage companies to operate in Canada. Now, it used to be rather difficult to get a mortgage, particularly if you didn't have the income or assets to justify it. Well, when the American companies came to Canada, that no longer became a problem. I used to work for a lawyer, and I did conveyancing work for him, and I saw some of the mortgages that were being awarded and the salary, household salary, absolutely shocking. But back to the story. Last May, in the face of data that showed resales falling by 57% and the average price of Canadian homes plunging by 10%, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation released a forecast suggesting prices could drop by nearly 20% in its worst-case scenario. Instead, they've rallied more than 20% in places like Vancouver and Toronto, where the price of the average home, including condos, just crested the $1 million mark. Meanwhile, a house that was listed in East Vancouver for $1.72 million went for $872,000 over asking after 9 days on the market. There was a website years ago, I don't know whether it's still around, it was called Crack Shack or Mansion, because most of these houses that are going to be bought in on the east side of Vancouver, they're going to be torn down. I mean, they're tear downs. And some new structure is going to be erected, and it is going to cover the maximum amount of territory. Last time I was in Vancouver, I went to an old neighborhood. I lived in Point Grey, and I see all of the houses, they go right to the boundary of the property line. So there's these tiny little corridors between the rows of houses on a street. Crack Shack or Mansion, again, people were shocked because this sold for X amount, over $1 million? No, as I say, they're all tear downs. This might seem like a good news story, and for Canada's homeowners, especially the ones in major markets like Vancouver and Toronto, it clearly is. But while we've averted one economic disaster, we may be inviting another down the road. Housing now makes up nearly 10% of Canada's GDP, which is approximately 50% higher than our historical average and twice that of the United States. To say that's an all-time high would be an understatement, BMO chief economist Douglas Porter wrote in a recent note. The danger here isn't just that Canadians are taking on even more debt than before and putting themselves directly in the line of fire if interest rates have to rise in response to a surge of post-COVID inflation. It's also that all of these dollars flowing into housing are being drawn away from other opportunities and sectors. Well, there's another problem as well, that Trudeau and his government have vowed to spend whatever it takes to deal with the hysteria and the shutdown of the economy with COVID-19. Now, unlike the United States, Canada's dollar is not the reserve currency of the world, so Canada has to borrow this money. Oh, interest rates are low now, but there may well come a point, and it could happen at any time, where the lenders say, you are just far too much in debt, and we have grave doubts about your ability to pay any of this money back. So we are going to jerk up the interest rates tremendously, in which case the housing bubble would definitely pop. As economist Kevin Carmichael wrote back in January, the world is in the midst of a transformative shift to a digital and carbon neutral economy. Yeah, maybe. A once-in-a-lifetime investing opportunity, and where are Canadians placing their bets? Houses, for the most part. People who barely qualify for mortgages in Canada, or actually don't, but get them anyway. This has caused a lot of problems, one of which is the people who buy these houses have no money to maintain them. So a lot of these houses look very shoddy indeed. $3 million house looking shoddy, right? And if there was ever anything major that happened, the roof fell in or the heating system had to be replaced, these couples would have very serious difficulty in meeting that expense. There's another phenomenon, which is, okay, we have no money left for discretionary spending. So these couples don't go out anymore on Friday night. I don't know. They might, buy a box of wine and order in some pizza and watch things on Netflix. And that is the extent of their social lives. As you might expect, this leads to a lot of divorces. And why those bets may be paying off for Canadians on an individual level, in the aggregate, they could prove disastrous for the country as a whole. An exuberant housing market will continue to be a magnet for capital and entrepreneurial energy that would be better deployed in more productive industries, Carmichael wrote. Thousands of entirely rational decisions could unwittingly erode Canada's competitiveness. There's no planning in my country, especially no economic planning, something will turn up. Perhaps manna will, start falling from heaven. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the, actual plan. This story, absolutely shocking to me. It may not be shocking to others. It's from the Gateway Pundit. A Milwaukee County Children's Court judge and former president and CEO of the Cream City Foundation, which runs the city's Drag Queen Story Hour program, has been arrested on 7 counts of child pornography. Brett Blom, 38, was arrested Tuesday for allegedly uploading 27 images and videos of children being sexually abused on the messaging app Kik. He was held overnight and released with a signature. He has been ordered to stay off social media and file sharing services and is not allowed near any children except the 2 that he adopted with his husband. The couple has 2 adopted children. Court records do not suggest they are part of any of the illegal images. What difference does that make? Child Protective Services is involved with their current placement, defense attorney Christopher Van Wagner said during the court hearing. Blom is accused of uploading the images both from his home and from the judge's chambers. The alleged pedophile judge was the president and CEO of the Cream City Foundation, which runs the Milwaukee Drag Queen Story Hour for local children. As of Thursday morning, however, all articles and mentions of him had been scrubbed from their website. The links were still cached by Google's search engine, and his role remained detailed on his LinkedIn page. According to his LinkedIn profile, Blom served as the president and CEO of the Drag Queen Story Hour Foundation until 2020, when he left to become a judge. Assistant Attorney General David Mass, who is prosecuting the case, has argued Blom should not have any unsupervised contact with children, including the 2 he and his husband adopted. Yes, allowing homosexual couples or just homosexuals or single people of any sex or gender affirmation to adopt children. I could say, what were they thinking? But I know what they were thinking. That the traditional family must be destroyed. Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett, who advocated for Blom's election, said that the charges were a complete surprise. Really? You remember that David A. French, a noted practitioner of Conservatism, Inc., who's come out of the closet as classical liberal, said that Drag Queen Story Hour was one of the blessings of American liberty? Yeah, that's conservatism for you. And where are we now? Just hang on. Oh, yeah. The idea that there are child predators out there, that have serious positions in politics or in government, absolutely outrageous. From the Los Angeles Times, QAnon's collateral damage, families struggle to pull loved ones back from the brink. Okay. It's not necessary to go all QAnon. We have something called Drag Queen Story Hour, in which children as young as 5 are brought to libraries to have monsters read to them or to roll around with the children. There are plenty of pictures of that. I mean, that's not enough. This fellow, James Alefantis, the pizza proprietor in Washington, D.C. Oh, this poor man, the victim of QAnon. This fellow posted sexual comments about babies on the internet. And this pizza place of his, what's it called? Comet Pizza. It's, fun for the whole family. And it's kitted out like a dungeon. This is not the sort of thing that children like. Children like bright, lurid colors. But oh no, that poor man. I don't know. QAnon it's not yet a crime to have any kind of association with QAnon or to read posts or read descriptions of posts. It may well be. That may be coming. Don't apologize when you were accused of, saying something bad 10 years ago or whatever. Just don't. Don't apologize. If you want to stick up for Piers Morgan and guess what? You get attacked for it. Don't apologize, because this always ends with you losing your job. This is from the New York Times by Katie Robertson. Alexi McCammond, who made her name as a politics reporter at the Washington news site Axios, had planned to start as the editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue next Wednesday. Now, after Teen Vogue staff members publicly condemned racist and homophobic tweets McCammond had posted a decade ago when she was 17 years old, she has resigned from the job. Oh, she resigned, did she? Condé Nast, Teen Vogue's publisher, announced the abrupt turn on Thursday in an internal email that was sent amid pressure from the publication's staff, readers, and at least 2 advertisers, just 2 weeks after the company had appointed her to the position. After speaking with Alexi this morning, we agreed that it was best to part ways so as not to overshadow the important work happening at Teen Vogue. Stan Duncan, the chief people officer, that's his actual title, chief people officer at Condé Nast, said in the email, which was obtained by the New York Times. In a statement included in the email, McCammond said her past tweets have overshadowed the work I've done to highlight the people and issues that I care about. I wish the talented team at Teen Vogue the absolute best moving forward. McCammond, 27, established herself as a prominent political reporter last year. She covered President Biden's campaign for Axios. Well, that sounds like a pretty easy job. It was a contributor to MSNBC and NBC. In 2019, she was named the Emerging Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists. She would have been the 3rd Black woman, what are we counting these things now, to serve as Teen Vogue's top editor after Lindsay Peoples-Wagner and Elaine Welteroth. Her job status became shaky days after Condé Nast named her to the position when the offensive tweets she had posted as a teenager in 2011 resurfaced. They included comments on the appearance of Asian features, derogatory stereotypes about Asians, and slurs for gay people. McCammond had apologized for the tweets in 2019 and deleted them. Screenshots of the tweets were recirculated on social media after her hiring at Teen Vogue was announced March 5th. Within days, more than 20 staff members at Teen Vogue posted a note on social media saying that they'd made a complaint to company leaders about the tweets, and McCammond apologized for them again, both publicly and in meetings with Condé Nast's staff. As criticism of her hiring mounted, Ultra Beauty and Burt's Bees, major advertisers with Teen Vogue, suspended their campaigns with the publication. Yeah, just once. I would like to see a company like Condé Nast say, we fired this person, and the person to say, I got fired, instead of, after deep reflection, I decided to step away, etc., etc. If what this woman did 10 years ago, when she was 17 years old, is so horrendous, then one would think that Condé Nast would be pleased, indeed obligated, to state publicly that she had been fired. The scrutiny of her tweets has come at a time of heightened concern about violence and harassment directed against Asian Americans. On Wednesday, after 8 people were killed in shootings in Atlanta, including 6 women of Asian descent, Condé Nast chief executive Roger Lynch sent a memo to the company staff that said 1 in 10 of its employees identified as Asian. Okay. No one seems to have pointed out the obvious. Okay, so 8 women working in massage parlors are murdered in Atlanta. 6 of them were Asian. This suggests to me that a great many people who work in massage parlors are Asians. Now, why would this be? The media doesn't really want to get into that. With its implications of immigration fraud and, slavery, sexual slavery, in fact. Let's go back to the chat. Hypothesis. Okay, we saw that already. The Kingdom of Bohemia is now the Czech Republic. Do they still call it that? They renamed it Czechia or something? Adam, prediction: housing bubble will be incorporated into the Great Reset. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Yeah. The housing bubble is a global phenomenon. Nobody saw it coming. Sure. Teddy Saginaw says, Putin wants to debate Biden. LOL needs to happen. KMG would be the perfect moderator. I don't know. Maybe they could put Biden in one of those machines, like in the pilot episode of Star Trek, where it just, okay, there's a thought in there somewhere, but it can't be expressed for various reasons. So a machine will speak it out in, metallic voice. Budgets balance themselves. Balcasaways points out that this is what Princess Rockstar, our prime minister, said. HI positive transgender, says KMG. There are so many of these strategically placed throughout society. If you're a parent with kids, keep your kids home, says Gandalf White the second. Hello to you, buddy. Resigning from Teen Vogue is always an improvement in your life situation. Asian massage parlors are everywhere. Chinese ladies. Yeah, the sainted former leader of the NDP party in Alberta, Jack Layton, was caught by the cops getting a happy ending from one of these Chinese comfort women in Toronto. And this story was, suppressed for years and years and years. Glib Medley says, Czech Republic, Czechia should change its name to Bohemia. I once suggested this, I guess, decades ago to a Slovak friend of mine, a professor. And he explained to me, no, that Bohemia is this is Bohemia, and the Czech Republic is more than Bohemia. Yeah, okay, I get it. Have you reviewed the deep fake vids of Joe talking to the press? I've acquainted myself with the controversy. This is from, Pitsky. I've seen the explanations, which ring true, that Joe just blundered too close to the microphones on two occasions. And also, there are issues with the video compression involved. Jonathan Paul says, even 35 years ago, massage parlors were all fronts for Asian prostitution. Hikma Warrior says, news media is gloating over the Atlanta mayhem. Enron says, Kevin impersonate Larry David saying stop. I don't think I know that one. Gandalf White II says, Biden called Harris President Harris. Soon enough, I suppose. Not too soon, though. As I've said, I don't think that this can happen before, Independence Day or Labor Day, because it would seem like too much of a stitch-up, that this was always the plan, that Biden was just the seat filler, the stalking horse, and that the plan was always that Kamala was going to be president. And if Biden resigns too early or is forced out too early, I can only imagine the rage that would result. Fox News. Don't you just hate it? This is from Deadline. Jill Goldsmith. NAACP urges NFL to rethink relationship with Fox, as Fox News regularly attacks NFL players for promoting racial justice. The NAACP doesn't stand for anything. It used to stand for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. But 10, 20 years ago, it was decided that the name was problematic, but it was a well-known name. So they would just be NAACP in the same way that NARAL is just NARAL. It doesn't stand for anything. It certainly doesn't stand for the National Abortion Rights Action League, because you're not supposed to use this word abortion. You're supposed to use the word choice. Derek Johnson, president and CEO of the NAACP, Thursday lashed out at Fox, accusing the media company of exploiting the NFL and its 70% black players, saying the league's increasingly high subscriber fees help subsidize Fox News programming. The announcement came shortly before Fox announced a new 11-year media rights agreement with the league. Quote, for several decades, Fox, and more specifically Fox News, has represented the worst traditions of American broadcasting. The media outlet has used its news division to sow bigotry and racism, create dissension. Dissension? We can't have that. Spread misinformation and promote conspiracy theories that ultimately led to an insurrection against the U.S. Capitol. It is safe to say the views and opinions of Fox News are often squarely positioned against the progression of our democracy and not in the general public's best interest. Johnson asked for a meeting with the NFL leadership to discuss Fox. But here's something that many do not know. Fox actively exploits its Fox Sports licensing deal with the NFL by extracting increasingly high cable subscriber fees to subsidize Fox News programming. This is the same network that has used its hosts and personalities to regularly attack the NFL and its players for promoting racial justice. Oh, is that what they're promoting? However, this is just one aspect of its inaccurate, incendiary coverage of racial injustice. Network personalities routinely attack Black Lives Matter and downplay the existence of systemic racism and police brutality. A league where nearly 70% of the players are Black and prides itself as America's favorite sports pastime should not be complicit in helping increase the profits of Fox News. 70% of players are Black. That sounds like a violation of disparate impact to me. But I don't know. Given the cratering numbers, viewership numbers for the NFL, $100 billion, 10-year rights renewals. This is again from Deadline. In deals collectively worth more than $100 billion, the NFL has reached 10-year rights extensions with existing TV partners and also taken the league into uncharted digital waters. Fox, NBC, CBS, and ESPN will remain homes for games, but ABC is re-entering the mix, and Amazon Prime Video will take over Thursday night games from Fox. The final details had been tipped for weeks, so the official confirmation brought no major surprises. The new agreements will begin with the 2023 season. Amazon Prime Video gains exclusive rights to Thursday Night Football, which has aired on CBS, NBC, and currently Fox in recent years. The streaming outlet first came in as a partner in 2017, and in the recent postseason got its first exclusive playoff game. Even though NFL ratings dipped 7% in 2020, and even the Super Bowl in February posted a notable decline, the majority of the top 100 Nielsen-rated shows in a given year are NFL games. The viewership erosion during COVID-19 was far less for the NFL than for other major sports. Is it COVID-19? I thought that the whole kneeling thing had a lot to do with this. The endless proselytizing for BLM. Strangely, or perhaps not strangely, the word kneel or the word kneeling does not appear in this Deadline story because everyone's in favor of kneeling. Joe and Jane's six-pack, they're 100% behind BLM. They're allies. Perhaps the people in the NFL actually believe this. Story here from, more cringing, more groveling. This is from the LA Times. NBC Universal has long kept a tight grip on the annual Golden Globe Awards, one of Hollywood's most prized events. The award show has aired on NBC for 25 years, and in 2018, NBC Universal solidified its perch by renewing its TV rights deal with the Hollywood Foreign Press Association and Dick Clark Productions. NBC Universal accepted a staggering increase in fees because the show had grown in prominence, becoming even more important to the network and its advertisers who struggle to engage viewers in a fractured TV landscape. NBC Universal agreed to pay the group of international journalists and Dick Clark Productions nearly $60 million a year through 2026 for rights to televise Hollywood's Night of Glitz and Glamour, up from about $21 million a year in 2018. But now all of that is in doubt. I wondered why, some years ago, that I no longer cared about Major League Baseball's All-Star Game. That was always a highlight, when I was a boy. And then as I grew older, I thought, I'm not interested in this anymore. I don't want to watch it. There's a break, All-Star break, so I'll take advantage of the All-Star break. And then I realized that, when I was young, you got one baseball game a week, on Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, depending on where you live. And then you started to get more and more baseball every single day, and all these different teams. So the All-Star game would be, for many people, the only chance they got to see these stars on different teams, except, of course, if they played in the World Series. So I think a similar thing has happened to awards show. Obviously, the Academy Awards were exciting to a lot of people because you had all these famous people in one place. Similarly, the Golden Globes. There is no escaping celebrities now. No escape. And I think that this has led to celebrity fatigue. Why should I spend, 3+ hours watching the Oscars, or was it 4+, or similarly with the Golden Globes? And it's the same people that I see every day on the internet over and over again. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association is in turmoil following an LA Times investigation which exposed questionable business practices and the lack of Black members. The 87-member group has not had a Black member in more than 20 years. And this week, more than 100 of the entertainment industry's most powerful publicists sent a blistering letter to the HFPA threatening to cut off the group's access to their star clients unless the organization makes significant reforms. The Publicists and Time's Up, the activist group that was founded by prominent women in Hollywood, have called out NBC Universal's association with HFPA. Some have argued the Comcast Corp-owned media company shares responsibility for the embattled organization's problems, which the Publicists in their letter wrote included discriminatory behavior, unprofessionalism, ethical impropriety, and alleged financial corruption. The HFPA announced that it would hire a diversity and equity expert and engage in outreach to try to recruit Black journalists and others from unrepresented backgrounds. This week, the HFPA vowed to expand its membership from 87 to 100 or more, adding at least 13 Black journalists to its ranks. Look, it's been an open secret for decades that the Golden Globes are corrupt as hell, that the members of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association expect gifts, lavish gifts, and or money to get nominated for a Golden Globe, and even more to win it. And Hollywood is just noticing this now? Apparently the fact that, it's an open secret, the Golden Globes are corrupt as hell, that wasn't particularly important. The fact that there weren't any Black members, well, that is far, far more important. Let's go back to the chat. Jonathan Paul says, I see more kente cloth and American celebrities than I ever saw in 5.5 years in Ghana. Professor Paul, I read that Ghana is no longer going to be selling chocolate to Switzerland, and the Swiss are quite upset. However, I also read that it seems as if Ghana might be deciding to send their chocolate instead to the People's Republic of China. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that. British American says, I've heard that foreigners assume that America's at least 40% Black. Well, I think a lot of Americans believe that America's at least 40% Black. I mean, if you watch TV shows, and particularly the commercials, you are likely to come to that belief. Okay. It's not like those insurrectionists were beating up their girlfriends or anything, says Dan Allison. Yeah, Andrew Cuomo, responsible for the death of 15,000 people? Not a story. Andrew Cuomo engaged in inappropriate conversation, looking for a kiss from staffers. The end of the world. These are our priorities now. Palpicasso 88 says CNN ratings down 47% in the 25 to 54 demo since Trump left office. It's all good. It is all good. Again, British American just saw that The Wonder Years is being rebooted, wait for it, with a Black family. Wonder years so white, I suppose. Okay. We're going to talk about, oh, yes, this creep. Alexander Vindman. Once again, the Soviet Union did not send us its best. This is from Joel Pollack at Breitbart. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, retired, a key figure in the first impeachment trial of President Donald Trump, published an op-ed Monday at the Lawfare blog in which he proposed suing conservative media outlets to make them less radicalized. Vindman had worked at the National Security Council and appeared in dress uniform before the House Intelligence Committee to testify against Trump in support of the theory that Trump had withheld aid from Ukraine in exchange for investigating his 2020 rival, Democrat Joe Biden. Evidence provided by other witnesses contradicted that claim. Vindman would not reveal who the anonymous whistleblower was who reported the president's phone call with the Ukrainian president, and recent analysis by Byron York of the Washington Examiner has suggested that Vindman himself was the main instigator of the investigation that led to the impeachment, which ultimately led to Trump's acquittal. During the impeachment inquiry, Vindman made much of the fact that he and his family had fled the Soviet Union and that he had a deep appreciation for American values and ideals and the power of freedom. Now, lamenting that he had not responded by suing President Trump over tweets about him, not too late, is it? And noting that the First Amendment gravely limits what government can do to stop, quote, lies, unquote, by the media, Vindman argues that right-wing media should be held accountable through a lawsuit strategy. Vindman's strategy replicates that used by left-wing pressure group Media Matters, whose Project 2012 strategy document called for lawsuits to be brought against Fox News and its feeders, providing counsel or litigation costs to potential plaintiffs. And, oh, this is too funny. This is too funny. Lèse-majesté in action. It's from John Binder at Breitbart. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas asserts that it is, quote, extraordinarily disrespectful, unquote, to ask him about American victims of crimes committed by illegal aliens. During a hearing before the House Homeland Security Committee on Wednesday, Representative Kat Kamek, Republican of Florida, asked Mayorkas about illegal alien crime victims. Specifically, she referenced the case of 19-year-old Amber Scott, a high school cheerleader at the time in Douglas County, Colorado, who was kidnapped at knife point in 2006 by 25-year-old illegal alien Pedro Martinez. Martinez had previously been deported to his native Mexico after 3 felony drug convictions, but he returned illegally to the U.S. at a later date. Martinez was sentenced to life in prison without parole in May 27. How many more Ambers will there have to be? Kamek asked. And Mayorkas says, Congresswoman, I find that question to be extraordinarily disrespectful. Disrespectful not only to me, but disrespectful to the men and women of Homeland Security and to all the frontline personnel throughout this country who dedicate themselves to the security and safety of the American people. Yes, catch and release. That certainly sounds like a thorough dedication to the safety and security of the American people. Extraordinarily disrespectful. How it reminds me of Harry and Paul's story of the twos, the BBC Two, in which they show a parody of a 1950s interview, or I guess it would be 1960s, where the host of this news show asks sort of a mildly probing question, and the government minister, played by Paul Whitehouse, says, "Are you doubting me?" And Harry says, No. You are the most interesting man I have ever met, and please speak for as long as you like. Perhaps that's what Alejandro expects. From Politico, panic buttons and bulletproof vests, fearful lawmakers stock up on protection. Earlier this year, the Massachusetts Office of Campaign and Political Finance received an unusual inquiry from a state lawmaker. Could campaign funds be used to purchase bulletproof vests, gas masks, and pepper spray? In the weeks and months after the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot is the kind of query that is surfacing with regularity both in Washington and in state capitals across the country. Alarmed by a growing number of threats, harassment, and scenes of violence at government buildings, lawmakers in both parties are seeking clarity from election agencies on whether they can spend campaign dollars and taxpayer money on security and personal protective equipment, everything from body armor to panic buttons at home. When a member of the United States House of Representatives, Steve Scalise, a Republican, was shot by a Bernie Sanders supporter, somehow there wasn't this panic. Again, I was talking about this yesterday. The idea of the legislatures of the United States cowering in terror along with their staff on January the 6th. Oh, they're not going to do anything themselves to resecure the Capitol building. No, 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 no. And what AOC saying that she almost died that day. These people talk tough, but they're weak. They're obviously gravely weak. Speaking of a weakling, let's talk about Prime Minister Boris Johnson. This is from Jack Montgomery at Breitbart. Police will begin recording offenses believed to be motivated by misogyny as hate crimes in the wake of Sarah Everard's apparent murder, Boris Johnson's government has confirmed. Speaking for the Johnson administration in the House of Lords, a Home Office junior minister, the Baroness Williams of Trafford, said that from the autumn of 2021, we will ask police forces to record and identify any crimes of violence against the person, including stalking and harassment and sexual offenses, where the victim perceives it to have been motivated by hostility based on their sex, which, as I have said, can then inform longer-term decisions, unquote. Hate crimes, what a stupid idea. Apart from people who are paid to commit violence, contract killers, goons, violent crimes are motivated by hatred. Yeah, they are. Oh, no, but you see some sorts of hatred, just the hatred of, I don't like your face, or I don't like your tone of voice. Oh, no, but see, some kinds of hatred are worse than other kinds of hatred. When we're talking about murder, how could that possibly be true? Johnson, who describes himself as a feminist, according to his new White House press style secretary, former Guardian and BBC journalist Allegra Stratton, told the House of Commons that we have to address the fundamental issue of the casual, everyday sexism and apathy that fails to address the concerns of women. That is the underlying issue. Oh, apathy? Is that a hate crime? No. Nigel Farage commented, yet another hate crime, this time misogyny. Knife crime can soar, but mother-in-law jokes are out. Indeed, the practical effect of the new laws is in some question, as existing laws against genuine harassment and even sex crimes are not enforced with any great rigor by British judges. There are many such cases, like the one I'm going to mention now. And when I first read about this, I think it was in Peter Hitchens' column in the Mail on Sunday several years ago, I could scarcely believe it. Takeaway worker Javed Mia, 23, was recently allowed to walk out of court a free man with a suspended sentence of just 6 months. So he would have been out in a matter of weeks, even if a term of immediate custody had been imposed, after stalking a woman through the street at night and sexually assaulting her in Oldham. The judge may have been swayed by the defense's bizarre suggestions that the attack was quite opportunistic and warning that the predator would lose his job if sent to prison, and he is the sole earner for his family, so this would have a significant impact. Well, for years now in Britain, the government has been unable to deport people who committed serious crimes, because they've established a family life in Britain. That is to say, if you knock up some woman and a baby is delivered, you're safe. You're never going to be sent back to whatever, hellhole you came from. Oh, no prison for a trans woman who attacked underage girls in public toilets. A trans woman was allowed to walk free from court after being convicted of sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl in a public restroom. I think that this is transference, as they say. these calls for curfew. The Georgina Loud in the Daily Express, curfew for men. Will UK implement 6 p.m. curfew for men? Why this one murder of Sarah Everard? Why is this? Why did this bring tens of thousands of people to the streets? Well, because the police officer who's been arrested for allegedly killing Sarah Everard is a white man. And I think after the rape and grooming scandals that went on for about 20 years, and the full horror of what Jimmy Savile got up to for decades, helped every step along the way by the police and the government. I think that British women they're furious, but they know that they're circumscribed in what they can say. Even to bring up the rape and grooming scandals in Britain makes one liable to be accused of Islamophobia and racism. And of course, other crimes might, like the one I just mentioned, attacking 10-year-olds. Well, you don't want to be called a transphobe, do you? And the Sarah Everard Memorial movement has been hijacked by the usual suspects. Protesters scrawled "All coppers are bastards" acronym on Battle of Britain Memorial and defaced Churchill quote during Sarah Everard protest as role of radical anti-austerity feminist groups marches is revealed. And we also have this from the Daily Mail. This is not what she would have wanted. Sarah Everard's friend says she avoided Clapham Common vigil because her tragic death has been hijacked by people blaming men or police for the actions of one individual. The idea that one particular murder, could result in such an outpouring and actually a preposterous demand for a curfew for all men from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. shows me once again that Britain is at the edge. It's at the edge. I don't think that it would take very much for us to see insurrection there, for us to see an attempt at a revolution there. This is from the Associated Press. A white gunman was charged Wednesday with killing 8 people at 3 Atlanta area massage parlors in an attack that sent terror through the Asian American community, which has increasingly been targeted during the coronavirus pandemic. The day after the shootings, investigators are trying to unravel what might have compelled 21-year-old Robert Aaron Long to commit the worst mass killing in the U.S. in almost 2 years. Long told police that Tuesday's attack was not racially motivated. He claimed to have a sex addiction, and authorities said he apparently lashed out at what he saw as sources of temptation. But those statements spurred outrage and widespread skepticism given the locations and that 6 of the 8 victims were women of Asian descent. The shootings appear to be at the intersection of gender-based violence, misogyny, and xenophobia, said State Representative B. Nguyen, the first Vietnamese American to serve in the Georgia House and a frequent advocate for women and communities of color. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, yes, that's her actual name, said that regardless of the shooter's motivations, it is unacceptable, it is hateful, and it has to stop. Well, what are you going to do about it? How about banning massage parlors? Because they're houses of prostitution. And again, I go through these stories, and okay, 6 of 8 Asian women. So how many Asian women are there working in massage parlors? And these news stories, the Associated Press and others, do not want to examine this subject, even though the clear implication of their story is that there must have been anti-Asian racial prejudice involved, specifically because 6 of the 8 were Asian. Well, is it rare or is it commonplace for Asian women to work in massage parlors. And, oh yes, lockdown Spaniards seethe with envy as Germans flock to Mallorca. It makes absolutely no sense, this is from Reuters, that in Spain we can't move between regions, but any foreigner can come in and spread infection, said Emilio Rivas, 23, who lives in Madrid. The young tax assessor wanted to get out of town for the holidays, but must instead stay home because Spain banned travel between regions over Easter to avoid a repeat of a spike in contagion seen after an easing in restrictions over Christmas. Lockdowns forever, in other words. There are so many these type of stories, like the one I'm going to refer to next, that one might get the impression that the media is has an agenda. That what's part of the agenda? Oh, I don't know, that people should stop having children entirely, say, and that actual sex between men and women is somehow wicked. This is from Stuart McDill at Reuters. Interest in cybersex is soaring as the pandemic has left people subject to lockdowns and travel bans and unable to seek intimacy in the usual ways, according to experienced designer Angelina Alexandrovich. Experienced designer. At the same time, the pandemic has also pushed people's willingness to use a tech solution to an all-time high. Alexandrovich runs a collective called Raspberry Dream Labs, which creates multi-sensory cybersex experiences which allow people to enjoy intimate moments together, even when they are not in the same place. That is impossible by definition, but never mind. Because of COVID, a lot of people understood how we can use technology and virtual reality in exciting and expanded ways. Whereas VR used to be dismissed as something just for gamers, it has gone mainstream and it is being used in intimacy and dating, she added. In an industrial unit in North London, 2 volunteers demonstrate her prototype experience combining VR, augmented reality, and even smell, delivered through a collar worn around the neck. How appropriate. A headset and handheld sensors. The volunteers see each other as outline human forms through their headsets and caress each other without ever actually touching. Now that's the final goal, isn't it? Touching people is dangerous in all sorts of ways, and so probably best to bring an end to that. The Toronto Star, which never disappoints, from Rosa Saba. The owners of multiple Toronto sex shops have filed an application for injunctive relief to have sex toys recognized as legitimate medical supplies under the Reopening Ontario Act. The province and the city say the shops are not essential businesses under the Act, and that interpreting the legislation to let sex shops stay open would open the proverbial floodgates for other businesses with similar arguments, weakening the effectiveness of lockdown restrictions. Veronica Kazolias, owner of The Nookie on College Street, was ticketed in late 2020 for remaining open. She said she opened because many of the products she sells are prescribed by health professionals to treat a range of conditions. She also carries safe sex products, some of which are specialty items that can't be found in pharmacies. Presumably they can be bought over the internet, though. At the same time, Kazolias told the Star that she called Ontario's Stop the Spread business hotline and was told that her business qualified to stay open. She also consulted the lockdown legislation, which calls businesses that sell, rent, or repair assistive mobility, medical devices, aids, and/or supplies essential. Oh, okay. I wonder what will happen with that. You see, you make exceptions, and then people want to be one of those exceptions, which leads eventually to a call for no exceptions. Am I supposed to be terribly upset that John Kerry was photographed on an American Airlines plane not wearing a mask? Doesn't bother me, but it seems to bother an awful lot of people. Lucy Wyatt writes in The Conservative Woman, why did the government bin its own pandemic plan? And she begins, we have been subjected to appalling levels of propaganda and emotional blackmail for a year. The government, it would seem, knows no bounds to its manipulation, keeping, it would seem, to a script formulated not just by the World Health Organization, but by the World Economic Forum as well. The fact is that the pandemic narrative was taking shape long before the Chinese COVID crisis went live. According to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a planning exercise involving Bill Gates, the WEF, and others was held in October 2019. It was known as Event 201. Critical to the exercise was a discussion about how to manage information in case of a pandemic. Notes afterwards recommended, quote, governments in the private sector should assign a greater priority to developing methods to combat mis- and disinformation prior to the next pandemic response. Governments will need to partner with traditional and social media companies to research and develop nimble approaches to countering disinformation. Among others at the exercise were representatives of the Chinese government. No Brits appear to have been present. The first inkling of the subservience of Britain to a global dictation was Boris Johnson's decision in March 2020 to jettison its own pandemic planning dating from 2011 that followed a tried and true methodology, as was also the WHO's advice until 2019. Panicked by Neil Ferguson's hyperbolic modeling, he decided to climb on board and experiment in mass social control with much of the rest of Europe. A rereading of the original 2011 UK government pandemic advice document makes the choice of the lockdown route seem quite incredible. It states, for example, that, quote, there is very little evidence that restrictions on mass gatherings will have any significant effect on influenza virus transmission, and that allowing normal gatherings may help maintain public morale during a pandemic. The document reports, furthermore, a lack of scientific evidence on the impact of internal travel restrictions on transmission, and advises that attempts to impose such restrictions would have wide-reaching implications for business and welfare. It therefore presumed that government will not impose any such restrictions. Likewise, it advised that schools should not close because of substantial economic and social consequences and a disproportionately large effect on health and social care. Also proposed in the 2011 advice as an integral part of the response to a pandemic were clinical countermeasures such as antiviral medicines to ease pressure on intensive care services. Why the panic? Well, who was the first? Where did the panic start? Because the excuse seems to be, well, everyone else was doing it, and we'd look silly if we didn't do it as well. Well, you know, they didn't look at it that way in Sweden, say, but we're not supposed to talk about Sweden. So I'm going to return to our discussion of James Burnham's The Machiavellians, Defenders of Liberty, and his discussion of the circulation of elites by Vilfredo Pareto. And let's see where I ended yesterday. Pareto was talking about the necessity for a circulation of elites. Otherwise, the elite becomes atrophied and is subject to collapse or revolution. Burnham writes, Pareto's theory of the circulation of the elites is thus a theory of social change, of revolution, and of social development and degeneration. It is a restatement in new and more intricate terms of the point of view common to the modern Machiavellians and found more crude in Machiavelli himself. Pareto claims, as we have seen, that though we cannot come to objective conclusions about the strength of a society relative to other societies, we cannot make any objective judgment about what type of social structure is best. Second, in discussing the distribution of residues, Pareto implicitly joins the other Machiavellians in an evident preference for social checks and balances. A mere handful of citizens, so long as they are willing to use violence, can force their will upon public officials who are not inclined to meet violence with equal violence. Confronted with these circumstances, Pareto believes that analogies from comparable processes in the past made plain what was to be expected. In one way or another, probably catastrophically, the social unbalance within the elites would be corrected. Internal revolutions and the impact of external wars would reintroduce into the elites large numbers of individuals strong in the residues of group persistence, class 2, and able and willing to use force in the maintenance of social organization. This development might mean the almost total destruction of certain of the existing elites, and along with them of the nations which they ruled. In other cases, a sufficient alteration in the character of the elite might take place in time to preserve the community, though greatly changed. This survey should seem familiar today. Pareto was writing in advance an outline history of the generation just past and the present. Munich in 1938 was, in its way, a definitive expression of his theory of the circulation of the elites. At Munich, there was demonstrated the importance of an exclusive reliance on Class I residues. Combinations, no matter how shrewdly conceived, could no longer meet the challenge of the matured world social problems. At the same time, Munich revealed that only those two nations, Russia and Germany, where a redistribution of the elites had already taken place, had been able to prepare seriously for the war, which was so evidently sure to come. And the next section is a summation of the book, Politics and Truth. I'll just read the introduction and begin in full tomorrow. Burnham writes, I shall now summarize the main principles of Machiavellianism, those principles which are common to all Machiavellians and which taken together define Machiavellism as a distinctive tradition of political thought. These general principles constitute a way of looking at social life, an instrument for social and political analysis. They are capable of being applied concretely in the study of any historical period, including our own, that may interest us. They are to be found implicit as a rule in the writings of Machiavelli himself. The modern Machiavellians, with a vastly increased number of historical facts at their disposal, have explicitly formulated them. In each case, in the list that follows, I shall state in parentheses the contrary point of view, which is opposed to the Machiavellian principle. In order to understand what a thing is, we must understand also what it is not. I'm going to be moving to theater Thursday shortly. But before I do, I wanted to talk about an article that appeared from Dorian Lynskey in The Guardian today. Why bands are disappearing. Young people aren't excited by them. Maroon 5's Adam Levine was scoffed at for suggesting there aren't any bands anymore, but if you look at the numbers, he's right. The moment we started as a band was the best thing that ever happened, sings Matty Healy on the 1975 recent single, Guys. There's a clue. The song is an ardent love letter to the band and to the romance of bands in general, the camaraderie, the solidarity, the joyous fusion of creativity and friendship. It's an old sentiment, but an increasingly rare one. It's funny, when the first Maroon 5 album came out in 2002, there were still other bands. The band's frontman, Adam Levine, told Apple Music's Zane Lowe this month, I feel like there aren't any bands anymore. I feel like they're a dying breed. Levine was quick to clarify that he meant bands in the pop limelight, but the internet doesn't really do clarification. So his remarks sparked bemusement and outrage among the literal-minded, from aggrieved veterans such as Garbage, What Are We, Adam Levine, Cats, to fans of newcomers such as Fontaine's DC and Big Thief. But her feelings aside, Levine was broadly correct. When Maroon 5 broke through in the OOs, there were new bands forming all the time, many of which quickly proceeded to go platinum and headline arenas. In the realm of pure pop, meanwhile, talent shows such as The X Factor became a reliable incubator of girl groups and boy bands, from Girls Aloud to One Direction. These are fake. Everything that comes from Simon Cowell is completely fake. But to continue, no longer. Popular music's center of gravity has undeniably moved towards solo artists, at least when it comes to serious commercial success. This paradigm shift has been obvious for a while now. What happened to all the bands? Asked Rostam Batmangley after leaving Vampire Weekend in 2016. Is it just that bands are corny now? He asked. Whichever metric you use, the picture is clear. Right now, there are only 9 groups in the UK top 100 singles and only 1 in the top 40. 2 are The Killers and Fleetwood Mac, with songs 17 and 44 years old, respectively, while the others are the last UK pop group standing, Little Mix, 2 four-man bands, Glass Animals, Kings of Leon, 2 dance groups, Rudimental, Clean Bandit, and 2 rap units, D-Block Europe, Bad Boy Chiller Crew. There are duos and trios, but made up of solo artists guesting with each other. In Spotify's top 50 most played songs globally right now, there are only 3 groups: BTS, The Neighborhood, and the Internet Money Rap Collective. And only 6 of the 42 artists on the latest Radio 1 playlist are bands: Wolf Alice, Haim, Royal Blood, Architects, London Grammar, and The Snuts. I have some thoughts about this. For the record industry, individuals are easier to deal with, to control, if you will, than bands. In bands, you have 4, let's say you have 3, 4, 5, 6 members, perhaps. There's going to be factions in the band, and members of the band are going to take contrary positions just to be contrary. This often happens. Hey, this is our cover art for our new release. Well, that looks ugly. Well, you didn't say that before. Well, I'm saying it now. That sort of thing. A decreased attention span. If you have a solo artist, all the attention is directed at that one person. If you have a band, you're expected to pay attention to everyone in it, and apparently that's beyond our concentration level today. Perhaps most important, bands are guy things. Yes, there are female bands. Haim is one of them. I rather like them, actually. And there are others mentioned in this story, but bands are for guys. And the record industry decided, circa 2000, that it no longer wanted to appeal to men. Well, to straight men, anyway. Because there is a level of, how would you say? There's a level of critical examination that exists there that doesn't exist among the people that the record industry has been selling to over the last 20 years, which are pubescent, or almost pubescent, or barely pubescent women and homosexuals. That's who I'm leaving aside rap and hip hop here. That's who the record industry has been appealing to. Why are they buying the records? They're not buying the records because they care about the music so much. The music is incidental. They are buying a narrative. They are buying a face. They are buying an image. They are buying a brand. And we see concomitant with this, people like Katy Perry advertising, all of these things, everyone getting into advertising. The only way to sell is out, as Patti Smith once said. And this was verboten in the rock biz for decades. You didn't use advertising. That would be selling out. Oh, you might endorse a particular guitar or a particular amplification system because you'd get free gear. But that's as far as it went. That if you look at the women who dominate the pop industry now, it's just personalities. And the music is completely incidental to that personality. Now, I suppose this is a long-term problem for the music industry. It's been my prediction for some years now that when all the warhorse bands from the 60s and 70s and perhaps the 80s, when they finally die, and they're going to die sooner rather than later, who is going to pay $100, $150, $200 to see bands in concert? In 10 years' time, or even 5 years' time, is anyone still going to care about Harry Styles? Isn't he already transitioning into something else? No pun intended, but he may be actually transitioning into, well, more than one thing. Harry Styles, yes. Oh, did you know that he's with Olivia Wilde now? No, he isn't, actually, because Olivia Wilde is a heterosexual woman. But what is this? There's always been gossip about people in the music industry, but it's the gossip that's the most important thing now. Going back to the guy thing, there was a period in popular music where there were intellectual pretensions both in the lyrics and in the music. Oh, yes, there are 11 different chords in this song, that sort of thing. Ooh, look at that change. That's all completely, it's gone now. It's completely irrelevant now. 9 people worked on this song, Grammy-winning song. Was it called Little Brown Girl or whatever? 9 people. And it has the most asinine lyrics imaginable. In effect, the audience for the pop industry now, given who these people are, they can effectively be bullied into consuming it. On the mimetic principle, everyone else is doing it. You do not want to be left out, do you? You don't want to be a weirdo, do you? No, and they don't. They don't want to be left out. So this is why we have, the disappearance of bands. And, I suppose, if you have 4 or 5 men on stage, it might present a rather threatening view. If you have someone like Harry Styles couldn't frighten a cat. And that's the way that the music industry likes it. Oh, he's a gender-bending pioneer, is he? He was rather late in the day for that sort of thing. And, Simon Cowell, I guess he cracked the code that you manufacture a band. Oh, yes, and we have a white one and a black one and an Asian one and a mix of something or other. And we shove them down your throat on TV every week. And guess what? People buy it. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Pitsky says, now recorded music is essentially zero value, so that pre-recording text status is now restored and ticket prices to shows go up. Well, yeah. What was it? The fellow on YouTube, what makes this song great? I've forgotten his name. He had an interesting recent discussion. Pop music, is it just a celebrity with a laptop? With artificial sounds, you can achieve a kind of perfection, from highs to lows and the wides, which is difficult to achieve with instruments. And so increasingly music is completely synthesized. Now, it used to be you'd have people like Moby make a record all by himself, but now you have up to 30 different producers on Beyonce records and many others, which suggests to me that, there's kind of a basic level declining competence there, or lack of confidence and competence. Okay, I have a vision for this record, or I'm going to, hire one producer and, we have a vision for this. No, you can't do that, because you might miss the lowest common denominator. If you put out 10 tracks, 10, 12 tracks, and they're all supposed to be hits, well, you're not going to be taking any chances. Yeah, Rick Beato, thank you for that, Anrun. And Halper. Okay, let's see. Let's go. No concerts in 10 years. Will be on the 28th wave. Yeah, that may not actually be a joke. Kenneth White says, I think that working hypothesis that there would be another Beatles or synth new wave music because of atomization, globalization is a very strong working hypothesis. No, I used to hear a lot about this in the 1970s. Who's going to be the next Beatles? There were never going to be another Beatles, because the conditions under which the Beatles, shocked the world, but, everyone knew about them. That can't happen again. Music was not all that important. Popular music was not all that important at the time. And the youth market had never been tapped in a way that the Beatles tapped them. The idea that popular music of that sort could be seen as intellectually significant, well, that was new. The conditions simply can't be repeated. As far as, you look at a band like Kraftwerk, which I understand is the second most sampled band in history, or act in history. Again, they came out of a particular tradition. It's all world music now, in the sense that there are no communities left. No places where particular styles obtain. It's all one big melange because everyone hears everything else. And so originality is very difficult under those conditions. Ogun's Iron says, the UMC, upper middle class whites, are woke just out of conformism. Possibly the worsening anti-whiteism might force them to wake up when they start bleeding for real. Okay, it's Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be talking about two rather ridiculous films. The first one is called Valley of the Dolls, which was released in 1967. And the second one, which is not a sequel, is called Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Now, the novel The Valley of the Dolls was written by a woman called Jacqueline Suzanne, who, for better or worse, revolutionized the publishing industry. She's clearly the most important figure in the publishing industry over, the last 100 years? Here's why. It once was that novelists, they write a novel, 1 a year, maybe one every 2 years, and they would seek to build up a reputation. And publishers would keep these titles in the catalog because publishers have always been interested in money, of course, but they sought respectability in the past. They like to be thought as, helping artists. So a novelist would publish so many novels, and there was the hope that a particular novel, it might fit the zeitgeist in a way such that it sold, buckets loads. I suppose, Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh is an example. You never knew when this was going to happen in the past. The novel sold, something like 500,000 copies in hardback in America during World War II. And it was a big surprise, at least to Evelyn Waugh himself. Jacqueline Suzanne, and she was helped by her editor, Michael Korda, she had a different view, that novels were going to be served up like blockbusters, that this was the novel you must buy. Otherwise, you'll be left out of the conversation. And her editor, Michael Korda, was involved in the fashioning of her books in a way that was not traditional. Although I should mention Iris Murdoch, the very highbrow, British-Irish novelist. She had an editor, a very good one, who essentially chopped her books in half. And after her, if you're familiar with Iris Murdoch, you might have noticed that her novels into the 1980s, late 1970s were, this thick. And then her editor died and her novels got to be this thick. They may have been twice as long, but they were not twice as good. So, and Jacqueline Suzanne, she would shop her books to different publishers. Who can give me the best deal? No loyalty to a publisher, but it worked. Her books became events, and the Valley of the Dolls was her first novel, was an absolute sensation. It's about show business, and it's about drugs, and it's about sex. And, well, the title, The Dolls, refers to barbiturates, downers. And I suppose that Jacqueline Suzanne thought that this coinage, referring to barbiturates, well, there's already a coinage for barbiturates, downs. Also, sometimes they're called reds, particular ones. But no, she came up with this dolls, and it never caught on. And in the second movie, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, there's sort of a fleeting reference to dolls in there, as if, oh, we haven't mentioned dolls here, so I guess we better mention them. Now, of course, the dolls has a secondary meaning as well, in that there are three good-looking women in the first movie who could be seen to be manipulated, taken advantage of by men. Mark Robson was the director of this. Probably best to call him a journeyman. I can't say that I'm impressed by the direction of this film. I must say the production value of this Valley of the Dolls is absolutely outstanding. I mean, it looks great. You've got a lot of, different musical numbers in it. It's beautifully shot. There's a number of really good montages in it. But I don't know. Could it be that because the actors and actresses are not so great, or is Robson simply not very good at directing people? Let's see. The dolls are Barbara Parkins, was a rather Italianate beauty who was from Vancouver, and so there was a lot of excitement in my town when this movie came out. She's a beautiful woman, no question, but she just seems medicated in this film. Dull. Patty Duke, who was a child star, she starred in the movie about Helen Keller, the miracle worker, and then she starred in the Patty Duke Show, which was about identical cousins. And I have to say that she is a revelation in this film. She plays a character called Neely O'Hara, who is desperate for fame and achieves fame and becomes a monster. In the novel describes events that happened over decades. Well, the movie describes events which happen over, a couple of years. And, you might ask the question, how did Patty Duke get to come from being, a rather sweet, naive woman to an absolute monster? Well, you don't want to ask questions like that about Valley of the Dolls. The third doll is Sharon Tate, who, of course, was one of the victims of the Manson family. I mentioned a couple of years ago when I found out that Margot Robbie was cast as her in Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that this enraged me because Robbie is thin and efficient, starved to perfection. And Sharon Tate was a doe-eyed, a fulsome beauty of the type that Hollywood banned quite some time ago. Too womanly, you see. The great Susan Hayward plays the grande dame of Broadway in this film. Helen Lawson, she's very amusing. I mean, it's over the top, but these characters, tend to be over the top. Judy Garland was originally hired, and you could see Helen Lawson's character as being based on Judy Garland or perhaps Ethel Merman. The male lead is played by Paul Burke, and he was a TV star of the 1960s with Naked City and also 12 O'Clock High. I suppose he's, handsome enough, but again, he just seems like a stiff. He plays an absolute cad in this movie. That Barbara Parkins, a character who's working for him, Ann Wells is her name, is clearly besotted with him, and she is a beautiful and intelligent woman, but he just doesn't want to get tied down. Now, a better actor than Paul Burke, what might have been able to get us to sympathize with this jerk, but it doesn't come off in this movie. Lee Grant, the fine actress Lee Grant, seems to have walked in from a different, better movie. She plays the sister of the singer Tony Pillar, who comes to a tragic end. Very protective of him is she. And I should talk about the music in this, that John Williams did the score. The songs are written by Andre Previn and his then wife, Dory Previn. Andre Previn, well, he did pop music, he did jazz, he did records with greats like Shelley Mann. He became one of the leading conductors in the world, opera writer. He was married to Mia Farrow, and yeah, just look at this. Mia Farrow has a particular type of man that she was looking for. Famous, There's one of the interesting things in the difference between Valley of the Dolls and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is in the music, because 1967. They're still doing this very old-fashioned, brassy, Tin Pan Alley stuff, and it's kind of embarrassing. I mean, technically, the stuff that they come up with, I mean, it's good, but it was clearly past its sell-by date at that time. I talked about Patty Duke. Yes, here's a line. Boobies, 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 nothing but boobies. Who needs them? I did great without them. Yeah, an over-the-top line. It's an over-the-top performance, but it is it's very entertaining. It's really naked, that if she had appeared, Patty Duke had done this performance in, say, a John Cassavetes movie, I suppose the critics would look a little differently at it. But who would have guessed that Patty Duke was such an attractive woman? As far as her dismissive comments about boobies go, she seems to acquit herself quite decently in that department. I mean, obviously she is no Sharon Tate. Okay, so all of these women become addicted to dolls or barbiturates, and their lives careen out of control. This is a very melodramatic movie. As I say, production value is great location, photography of New England in winter. And well, is there going to be any kind of happy ending in this film? There's a lot of really miserable stuff in this film. I have to say, there's a scene near the end of the film where Sharon Tate's character, Jennifer North, well, she's gorgeous, and there's a sad scene where I put a still up on my Twitter feed of her with this, enormous headdress. And, well, the director or someone like that jokes that, yeah, we spent all this money for that and no one's going to be looking at it. They're going to be looking below. And I don't know. It's a very cruel thing. You hire a woman for her physical attractions, and then what? You make fun of them? That seemed a little not true to life to me, but of course there's not much in this movie which is true to life. But there's an astonishing scene near the end of the film where Sharon Tate's character, well, she needs to make money because her husband, Tony Pillar, has what? Huntington's chorea, is it? Yes. And he has to be kept in an expensive asylum. And so she agrees to make art films, which are really, like nudie films, only since they're made by foreigners, they must be art. And then Sharon Tate's character, she's diagnosed with breast cancer. And Barbara Parkins goes to visit her in the hospital before her operation. And very pitifully, she says, that is to say, Sharon Tate says that men have only cared about me because of my body, and now I'm going to lose a breast, so no man is going to care about me anymore. And Barbara Parkins' reaction is along the lines of, oh, well, you'll get over it. And I thought, did a human person direct this movie? I mean, the scene is barely to be believed. Her scene, the death scene of Sharon Tate, it's really quite moving, actually, except for some reason, director's choice or editor's choice, we have a montage of all of the terrible things that have happened to Sharon Tate in this movie. And do they think we're idiots? All of these things happened within the last hour as we were sitting watching in the movie. We haven't forgotten them. But I guess they didn't want to take any chances, you know. Oh, I should mention Martin Milner is also in this film as Patty Duke's boyfriend slash manager. And this was when Marty Milner was playing the nice guy roles, like in Route 66. And he was in Sweet Smell of Success as the nicest, whitest, non-drug using jazz musician in history. And then later he played an obnoxious character on Adam 12 on TV for several years. But Patty Duke, she just knocks it out of the park again and again and again. And I don't know, there's a lot of jokes or references to homosexuality here. And I suppose that this should result in the movie being canceled, but some sort of exception is made for this. Neely Hara is absolutely hilarious. Ted Casablanca is not a fag, and I'm the woman who can prove it. I'm the dame, sorry, who can prove it. Too funny. Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, well, this is one of the strangest films ever made. And it was an X-rated film. And it was produced and distributed by 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox had come to grief with the release of Dr. Dolittle in 1967. And the movie studios were rather in a panic in the late 60s because previously they had been selling fun for the whole family. And the younger people decided, we don't want fun for the whole family. We want movies for adults. We're tired of spectacles, endless spectacles. Of course, The Graduate was an enormous hit in 1968. Of course, if a movie like that came out today, it would be totally ignored, or it would be, number 57 on your Netflix queue, something like that. But there was a sense in the late 60s that things were changing fast, very fast indeed, perhaps too fast. And in Hollywood, well, what is it that the kids want? I guess they want, and actually this movie Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is really not different, except for the excessive nudity, from any number of American international cheapy exploitation films at the time. Only this one was written by Roger Ebert, yes, that Roger Ebert, and was directed by Russ Meyer. Now, of course, the cliche is that Americans love big breasts, boobies. Well, Russ Meyer, like big breasts. And Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is filled with women with big, big breasts. And there is no opportunity missed to show them naked again and again and again. And it's just a totally wigged out scene in this movie. It's really a cheat. You see that, Roger Meyer was a pornographer. Russ Meyer was a pornographer. Roger Ebert I guess he wanted to be naughty. So he writes this naughty film, but throughout, and especially at the ending, well, these people have sinned and therefore they must be punished. But you enjoyed watching them naked, right? At the end, there's a voiceover, and it looks at all the characters and, why they came to grief and, the mistakes or sins that they committed. And I thought, this is like Ward Cleaver telling us what the message of Leave It to Beaver is going to be like. It's really not that much different from that. Okay, so you have three girls. They are in a rock band, and I have to say that the songs written for them are pretty good. And they've got the Strawberry Alarm Clock of Incense and Peppermints fame as well. And I knew that Ed King had been in the Strawberry Alarm Clock, and he was in later in Lynyrd Skynyrd. He wrote the famous guitar riff for Sweet Home Alabama. So there's a party scene where they're playing for quite a long time. And, that's Ed King. And I confirmed it. And I thought, wow, Ed King lost a lot of weight when he joined Lynyrd Skynyrd. You can barely recognize him. The name of this band is the Kelly Affair, which I think is a pretty neat name for a band. But then the totally outrageous Ronnie the Z-Man Barzell decides that they are to be renamed the Carrie Nations. And it's one of those movies, I don't know, you could see it perhaps parodied in Josie and the Pussycats, which is a much, much, much better film than this, where, you get signed to a record, girls get signed to a record contract, and it's a simple matter of going to the studio and, cutting some tracks, and then you're the biggest thing in the world. Because, of course, that's how the music industry works. Well, that's how it works in this movie. So Dolly Reed has a boyfriend when she moves to L.A., David Gurion playing Harris Allsworth. But her affections are stolen, and I guess management is stolen by the Z-Man. And Z-Man's interest in her, we're led to believe that the Z-Man is homosexual. So why would he be particularly interested in Kelly McNamara, a.k.a. Dolly Reed? That part never makes much sense. But one of the intentionally hilarious things in this film is that the fellow who plays the first boyfriend and manager, David Gurion, he has got one expression, which is a sad Greg Brady. And honestly, there must be like 15 minutes of this film where they just show his mopey face. And there's one long scene where the band is playing, where they have the Z-Man on one side superimposed and Harris on the other side looking gloopy as ever. Let's see, Harris has caught the interest of Ashley St. Ives, played by Edie Williams, who married Russ Meyer after this film came out. There's a different kind of overacting that she does in this movie than, say, Patty Duke does in Valley of the Dolls. She is apparently the sexiest woman alive, but she is so completely de trop in this that one finds oneself asking, is this really a man in drag? Because I've never seen a woman act like this before. There's an actress in this called Phyllis Davis who plays Kelly's aunt. And there's this subplot, which is very confusing and never seems to be resolved, about an inheritance that Kelly should have got but never got. Phyllis Davis, I have to say, is one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. And she later had quite a respectable career in straight movies. Most of the people in this film rather disappeared because it's pretty much a porn film, you know. Cynthia Myers was a Playboy playmate. she becomes a lesbian in this film, and it's very strange. I gathered that a lot of this movie was made up on the day. Cynthia Myers was a stunner, and she becomes a lesbian because apparently men won't leave her alone. But no one seems to pay any attention to her in the film. She shows up at this party and she just gets ignored, which really doesn't make any sense at all. So you just have all of this excess, ridiculous excess. And then, around the 1 hour mark, things in this movie get very dark indeed. Let's see. There is an attempted rape. There is a date rape. There is an abortion. And then there is a Manson-like killing spree at the end of the film. And a rather surprising revelation. I guess this was, the fact that this movie was produced and distributed by 20th Century Fox, they thought that perhaps this was some sort of representation, a legitimate representation of young America. And I suppose it is just, I have a anthropological interest in it because you can see how repressed Valley of the Dolls is. I was talking about nudity, I think, last week. Well, blink and you'll miss it. Well, you've got Barbara Parkins with Blink and You'll Miss It nudity in Valley of the Dolls. And then 3 years later, it's like, what's the breast count here? Have we got over 100 yet? Hollywood just changed so enormously in a matter of just 3 years. And I don't think that they knew what they were doing. Beyond the Valley of the Dolls has a huge cult following. And I don't think it's one of those movies that has a huge cult following because it is good, because it is bad, or more to the point, it is barely believable. Yes, this is funny. Gene Siskel, who of course later partnered with Roger Ebert for many years on TV, gave the film 0 stars out of 4, writing in the Chicago Tribune that the film unfolds with all the humor and excitement of a padded bra. Watching this film, I've seen it several times. I first saw it on TV probably in the early 70s, and when it was over, what did I just watch? But there were a lot of movies made in the 70s that had that effect on me. I just wonder whether Ebert and Russ Meyer, were they deliberately trying to be bad? Because, there's a horrifying accident that happens to the first boyfriend. And so we later see this fellow on crutches, okay? In the first movie, there is actually one of those scenes with a couple running through a meadow in slow motion. Yes, there is. And in the second movie, we see Kelly McNamara and the old boyfriend. He's on crutches. They are out in the wilderness in very rough ground with stones, boulders everywhere, navigating a creek and like a footbridge, which is this wide. It's one of the most ridiculous things I have ever seen, but it is filmed as if it's supposed to be, inspiring and heartwarming. And I thought, they didn't really think that, did they, at the time? But people thought all sorts of crazy things at that time. The late 60s, early 1970s in America, just a time when everything was up for grabs. Everything. Nothing was certain anymore. And this is reflected, especially in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. So you can see that, Meyer, we take that as a given, but Roger Ebert is really luxuriating in, the new freedoms, as the Coen brothers put it. in one of their movies. But on the other hand, there is very clearly a note of panic, of almost hysterical panic in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Let's go to the chat. Anwar says, yeah, I've actually watched some of them just for the old sneak previews, intro, nostalgic about Siskel and Ebert. God help me. Hickma Warrior likes Rainer Werner Fassbinder. I reviewed one of his movies a year or so ago. One of his BRD, The Marriage of Maria Brown. Jonathan Pohl says, yes, he noted that the only people you could slander in Hollywood movies were Germans and Arabs. Ebert was from Chicago. I think he was from Illinois. I think he went to the University, Champaign-Urbana. I don't know that he was from Chicago directly. Hickman Warrior is talking up Berlin Alexanderplatz. Neil Terry says, LOL, when a kindergarten friend and I saw each other on the first day of the first grade, we did the whole slow motion run to each other gag. It was a big cliche, even to kids. Actually, there's a extraordinary bit in SCTV, with Lola's TV special, which never happens and is a parody of The Wizard of Oz. But you see that Lola Heatherton had once been in love with Guy Caballero, the owner and president of SCTV. And you see an early scene of them with the, a filter of Vaseline smeared on the lenses. And you see Lola, got up in, high Lola fashion. And you see her in slow motion running through the meadow. And then you see Guy Caballero in his wheelchair following behind. He doesn't need the wheelchair. He only uses it for respect. And Lola says to him, "You canceled our love." And Guy says, "I had to cancel our love. It was doing badly in the overnights." That is very, very funny. Bellatar Sant'Angelo. Is that a recommendation? Okay. Kevin, instead of this double billing of mostly direct, why not do Godfather 1 and 2, or better yet, Once Upon a Time in America? Well, yeah, I think if I were going to do The Godfather, I would consider the movies separately. Okay, anything else here? Roger Ebert did publicly speak out against the anti-German bias of Hollywood films. Nobody else did. Even smarter than that half-a-man Roper as described by Vincent Gallo. No, Richard Roper, that guy was no good. No good at all. Heckman Warrior says, Kurosawa, Fellini, and Tarkovsky were my mother's milk in younger years, and Antonioni, too. Well, I talked about Antonioni a couple of weeks ago. They both really loathe the early 80s slashers. That would be Siskel and Ebert. Valley of the Dolls is on YouTube for free, says Jonathan Paul. I think Valley of the Dolls is... I can't recommend Beyond the Valley of the Dolls at all, actually. Valley of the Dolls is one of those movies I think that you watch. You get a bunch of people together and you have alcohol. And then you watch it. That's how that works. Ebert had somewhat better taste, while Siskel only seemed to like the blockbusters that were shallow. Yeah, it got to the point once where I'd seen so many of his reviews, Ebert's reviews, and he had the, 0 to 4 stars with halves. I could always decide. You give me a title, I could tell you how many stars. Oh, that's going to be 3.5. Roger Ebert was a sucker for Oscar bait or movies about serious subjects, the way we live now, that sort of thing. The kind of stuff that people make a fuss about when they come out, and the movies are immediately forgotten. Okay. What's coming up? On the book club tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about Tom Wolfe's final novel, Back to Blood. And coming up on Theater Thursday, next week, The End of the World. And of course, it happens on the highway. From 1967, directed by Jean Le Godard, a weekend on April the 1st for Easter. Eric Rohmer's rather astonishing 1978 film, Percival La Galois. And next week in Music Monday, I'm going to be discussing the phenomenon of so-called authentic classical performance. I will be back on the air tomorrow, Friday, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have not done so already, if you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could desperately use at this point, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. And as always, oh, yes, if you are in Canada, donations to the live stream can be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. Yes, as the Z-Man says, in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, this is my happening, and it's freaking me out, which, of course, is a line that Mike Myers stole. I will leave you, as always, with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.